Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is the beauty inherent in our democracy. The United States is a stable democracy, and the beauty of a democracy like ours is that our elections allow citizens who wish to activate their right to vote, to utilize their power as U.S. citizens by casting their ballot. Conversely, those who choose not to vote, who choose not to participate, who choose not to cast their ballot, are not punished, they're not reprimanded, they can speak their opinion and all kinds of other things. Just as nobody needs to know for whom you voted, nobody needs to know if you voted. I love our elections. I embrace the act of voting. I take a deep breath as I engage in the act of actually casting my ballot. And then I celebrate the moment. I wear my I voted decal with pride. Our government is a representative government. We talk a lot about republic. It is a republic, but it is a representative government. Quite simply, that means that the voters elect representatives, and those representatives are sent to the halls of power on the local, state, and federal level. They are there because we, those who cast our ballots, sent them there. And here is the essential point of a representative government. It is very important to understand this. Once elected, the representative is free to vote anyway on any issue. Voters can call, write, visit their elected representatives, try to influence them, try to educate them. But the elected official is only accountable to voters on one day and one day alone. And that one day is, of course, Election Day. It is only during those few, sometimes nail-biting hours that voters get to reward incumbents or to punish them and replace them with a newbie. In general, massive shifts do not take place in democracies. The pendulum doesn't swing too far to the right or too far to the left. In general, in stable democracies, it's the center where governing takes place. And that's the place where the consensus can be found, the magic, as it would be. It's the place where bipartisanship can work. It's the place where magic of government happens. Historically, having that massive electoral middle was the secret to the success of the U.S. government. Of course, there were moments when politics became heated and extreme voices caught the wave and gained influence. And that's when our system of checks and balances emerged. When making certain the extreme did not take over. Midterm elections are an important part of those checks, by the way, because midterms keep the government in check. Without a midterm election, the people's voices would only be heard and their choices would only be utilized every 4 years. Instead, every 2 years, the people have the ability to redirect, the opportunity to let their representatives know what they are thinking and how they are feeling about issues and about their choice of their representatives and the way in which the representatives have been acting and voting in government. Obviously, in the case of the trifecta, when the House, the Senate, and the White House are all on the same party, it is easier to move on partisan issues. But because of our system, that trifecta often only lasts for 2 years. Voters rebel against that kind of partisanship. They vote to stop it. That's what happened in this election. The voting public stopped the trifecta mid-step. We keep hearing that our country is split in half, that it's divided. But most pundits are wrong. Most of America is actually truly in the center. They lean a little to the left or a little to the right, depending on the issue. But most Americans are neither extreme right nor extreme left. Most voters find political extremism disheartening. Some would go as far as to say it's abhorrent. There are, of course, areas, regions, countries, cities, and states that are decidedly and historically more left or more right. They elect people in line with their positions. But when those people, their representatives, get to the halls of power, the only way for them to pass legislation is through compromise. The secret to success in government is compromise. Our electoral system is created on a difficult conundrum. And this is very hard to conceive, but it's the way it is. In order for a candidate to successfully navigate a win in the primaries, to win the primary, the candidates must present themselves as thoroughbred, pure-blooded, pedigreed. Candidates during primaries need to present themselves as representing the party and its policies up and down the line, above all else. But in the general election, that very same candidate needs to pivot to the center to get the middle-of-the-road voters. Every candidate on both the national and local level, and even the federal level, needs those middle voters. Certainly there are exceptions. New York City is an exception, LA is an exception, Boston is an exception. In New York City, let's say, for instance, Republicans are such a minority that the Democrat primary is the only election that counts. Once a person wins the Democrat primary, they waltz into office. I celebrate elections because I love the freedom of elections represent. In our democracy, if you are disappointed by the results, you have a chance to rectify the situation in 2, 4, or 6 years. Elected officials are given that injection of reality, humility of sorts. They are there to represent us. They are there because we put them there. And every few years, they are reminded. And every few years, they are indeed humbled. As for those who choose not to vote, they're missing out on one of the greatest opportunities, perhaps the greatest of all gifts bestowed on those of us fortunate to live in a stable democracy. Coming up next, Points of View. First up is a column from Ynet. It was written by Gilad Meiri, and it was published on November 10th, 2022. The column is entitled The Fall of the Israeli Left, and subtitled, it's a very long subtitle, The Collapse of the Political Left is not a sign of unpopular policies that the public refused to accept, but the result of a political message vacuum that the left created and was eventually swallowed by. That's a long subtitle, but the subtitle literally explains the entire column. The fact is that the Israeli left just disappeared, and this past election proves that fact. This is how Meiri begins his column. The early to mid-90s was a different time for Israel. The major wave of immigrants from the former Soviet Union was at its infancy. George Bush Sr. had just stopped Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait. Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir's national unity government had collapsed. Benjamin Netanyahu was still a junior politician who was only speaking about Iran's nuclear ambitions 60% of the time, and the perception of Labour Party Chairman Yitzhak Rabin was that of an experienced military general having previously served as the IDF Chief of Staff. Meiri gives historical perspective, pointing out that not too long ago the left was the Israeli superpower in politics. Not in the time of the founding fathers, Ben-Gurion, but certainly in the period of Rabin, in the period of Netanyahu. He writes, the perception, among other factors, contributed to the Israeli public's receptiveness toward the left, as was reflected in the 1992 elections. Labour Party won a staggering 44 seats in the Knesset. Meretz, Labour's little sister party, won an impressive 12. That's unbelievable. The 3 subsequent years saw the Israeli public, minus some fringe voices, show more cautious optimism about peace talks with the Palestinians, and specifically Yasser Arafat, the first president of the Palestinian National Authority. This was all proof of the strong left in Israel. And he continues by explaining this. After all, Rabin, Arafat, Shimon Peres won the 1994 Nobel Peace Prize. That year, the public saw the direction of the country with optimism while striving for peace. And then came November 1995. Yigal Amir, a far-right nationalist ideologue, decided to end that optimism in the most extreme of ways: political assassination. Yitzhak Rabin died, and with him, the dream of peace. Sure, Shimon Peres held on to the tattered dream at first and promised a rosy future, but then everything started going wrong. Buses were blowing all over the place. Israeli citizens were killed by the dozens, and the public became traumatized. Meiri explains that poor leadership and poor responses made the left irrelevant, and he writes, the left is too busy apologizing, justifying, and reacting. If it was a date, the Israeli public would say, it's a turnoff. Hastily pay for the drinks and then say they've forgotten to turn off the iron and make a quick escape. The left at the moment is just not a very attractive date. Sometimes the left doesn't react at all, letting the right's unfounded accusations go unanswered, which creates a vacuum. Nature abhors a vacuum, so it's immediately filled with more attacks and gossip about the ineptitude of the Israeli left, further compromising their ability to effectively assemble a political message. Meiri concludes by blaming Israeli politics, which he claims is dominated by the extremes and leaves no room for moderate and liberal voices. He concludes, the Israeli political sphere is filled with messages from the center-right and far-right, leaving no viable alternative for moderate Israeli voter to turn to. Many right-wing voters do not necessarily love Netanyahu or his Likud party, or even Ben-Gvir. They just arrive on election day, see no alternative that could have potentially won them over from the left, and they cast a vote for the devil they know. This was a smart piece, but it's wrong in certain ways. True, the media likes to cover extremes. The more extreme, the more media-worthy. But the media is also very excited about debate and about difference. Had there been a convincing voice or voices on the left, a stronger, younger generation would have been attracted just as they were 20 years ago. And it was only 20 years ago. Next up is a column by Yuval David, but his name is Yuval David. It was published on November 13th, 2022 in the Jerusalem Post. This column is entitled, A Call to Take Action Amid Wave of Anti-Semitism, opinion, subtitled, Violent hate crimes attacking Jews are regularly occurring in Florida, Georgia, Massachusetts, Michigan, Missouri, New Jersey, and New York. And that's only in the last couple of weeks. This is how Yuval David begins. Amid a recent wave of anti-Semitism from a number of dangerously influential people, I am doubling down on my call to action. The Jewish community, and anyone who considers themselves an ally for that matter, must demand consequences. How can we expect to fight Jew hatred if we do not rise to the occasion and hold those committing hate speech and hate crimes accountable? The youngest Holocaust survivors are now in their late 70s, and soon historical texts will be all that is left to tell their stories. This makes it infinitely more imperative that Jewish people make a point of speaking up for us. When we face hatred, when we see others face it. When hugely famous pop culture icons go on hate speech diatribes, when former and soon-to-be elected officials and candidates make anti-Semitic statements in the country, I am the grandchild of Holocaust survivors. My Jewish activism started when I thought it was my responsibility to never forget and always remember their stories and share them to ensure Jew hatred will not flourish. I never thought I would see this extreme level of hatred against the Jewish people be targeted by it myself. Take what's happening at the University of Vermont, for example. The U.S. Department of Education recently launched an investigation into multiple instances of alleged anti-Semitism on campus. A group designed to spread awareness and combat sexual assault called UVM, Empowering Survivors, declared on their Facebook page that Zionist students would be blocked from participating in the group. When Jewish students attempted to discuss the matter, they were told simply that the group wouldn't grant them a conversation. This is truly absurd. How is it possible? And this is not an isolated event, and David actually lists many more of this. How is it possible that this is happening on university campuses? They're not even allowed to join a discussion. David lists just a few of these instances and incidents around the country. His column continues, these incidents are not rare. The University of Tennessee regularly has anti-Jewish propaganda distributed on campus. Anti-Jewish graffiti and flyers sprawl across St. Petersburg, Florida, Middlesex, Massachusetts, Newark, Delaware, El Cerrito, California, Santa Fe, New Mexico, Ithaca College, New York, Jacksonville, Florida, and that is just in the last few days. Violent hate crimes attacking Jews are regularly occurring in Florida, Georgia, Massachusetts, Michigan, Missouri, New Jersey, and New York. And that is only the last couple of weeks. David ends with a call to action. He asks for help, for all of us to join the battle. In the areas where incidents of bullying, hate speech, hate crimes, and vandalism against Jews are happening, Jews themselves are facing pressure to hide their identity, to change their ways, to keep quiet, to live with anti-Semitism. And this is something that we can live with no longer. I'm taking action, not only because I'm being targeted, especially on social media, but because my people are being targeted. While I have a supportive community of family, friends, colleagues, elected leaders, organizations, and activists, other people do not. I am taking action especially to help those who need it most. And I urge you to take action, whether you are Jewish or not, whether Republican or Democrat, whether you are Israeli, American, or any other nationality. We need your help. This column is very, very sobering. It's very important, and it's very passionate. He wants people to join forces to combat anti-Semitism. Coming up, commentary through cartoons where pictures tell the story. I want to show you 7 cartoons and memes and headlines today. First up is a headline about Germany. Germans are suffering terribly from severe energy shortages. Rolling blackouts, near constant brownouts have become the norm in Germany. The headline reads, Germany is dismantling a wind farm to make way for a coal mine. It seems like a step back, but it is necessary, a necessary step because new clean energy simply is not in ample supply in Germany, and coal is plentiful. Next up, once again, a play on the former British Prime Minister, who was literally, while in office for only a few weeks, managed to hold that office through 2 monarchs. It is from a very funny website called Daily Stupid, spelled Stoopid. The headline reads, PM whose careers spanned 2 monarchies resigns. Next up is a perfect meme that describes me and my cooking style. But wow, what are you cooking? That smells so good starter pack. And what we see is a picture of an onion and oil and garlic and salt. Onions and oil and garlic is the start of every meal in our kitchen. It's the way we go. Next up is a meme that pokes fun at people who constantly post about any and every little thing that they're doing. It reads, did you know you can fly from any airport without announcing it on Facebook? It is sort of crazy. This next meme makes fun of the idea of adult situations. It reads, I hate it when TV shows say they contain adult situations, but then don't show anyone going to work, paying their bills, or cleaning up after their kids. That's a funny one. This next meme is very, very interesting because Peter Mondrian was the king, the master of abstract art. His shapes and colors were riveting. This is a true headline and illustrates just how abstract art can be. It reads, Mondrian painting has been hanging upside down for 75 years. Today, it hangs right side up again. Finally, we have a blast from the past. A little boy is changing the channel on a large TV console. The caption reads, rare photo of a remote control from the 1970s. I remember it vividly. This was so true. Parents would ask kids to get up and change the channel. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. An 18-year-old man was arrested in New Jersey. He was charged with threatening to attack synagogues and Jews. His threats were so menacing that they prompted the FBI to issue an unusual warning to synagogues across New Jersey and New York, by the way. Synagogues were told to bolster their security. Omar Al-Khatul of Sayreville, New Jersey, located near Highland Park, appeared in U.S. court where he faced 1 count of transmitting an online threat. A magistrate judge ordered Omar to remain detained without bail. Omar is accused of using social media apps on his phone to send another person a document that he had written about attacking Jews. The document is called When Swords Collide. According to a criminal complaint filed by the FBI against Al-Khatul, it wrote that he wanted to attack Jews on behalf of the Islamic State, aka ISIS. So he was an ISIS affiliate. Jerusalem District Planning and Building Committee approved the final blueprint for the construction of the new U.S. Embassy compound in Jerusalem. The embassy building will be 10 stories high. It will be built on 50 dunam, which is equivalent to 12 acres. The construction plan includes office buildings, parking space, residential buildings for employees, and of course, security measures. There is still a long way to go before the blueprint turns into a brick and mortar building. Like other plans, this must first be put up for a vote. After the vote, any objections will be presented to the Jerusalem District Planning and Building Committee for debate. From there, the U.S. government will obtain a building permit from the Jerusalem municipality, and then finally the construction, which is expected to take at least a decade, will begin. The Jerusalem municipality hopes that along with the United States, other countries will establish embassies in the capital city of Jerusalem. Moshe Leon, the mayor of Jerusalem, expresses his sentiments this way. The approval is another step in the process of fully transferring the embassy to Jerusalem. The Allenby compound is the appropriate compound for the American embassy. Moving the embassy will add value to the neighborhood and its residents. I thank my friend and U.S. Ambassador Tom Neidels for his actions and love for Jerusalem. The building will, of course, be constructed with Jerusalem stone. International pressure has brought on Iran to stop sending drones to Russia. At first, Iran denied that they were sending drones at all, but we saw the remains of them. There were Iranian drones shot down by Ukrainians. But now the Iranians have suspended shipment of long-range missiles and drones to Russia. A senior advisor to Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky is quoted saying rather cryptically that Iran was presented with an offer it could not refuse to slow the supply of weapons to Russia. The assumption is that Ukraine must have sweetened the pot and promised to return their ambassador to Tehran. They probably also promised trade and other exchanges, like tech and grain. One day we will know for sure. For now, it's all speculation and educated guessing. Ukraine has chosen to vote against Israel in the United Nations. Ukraine has condemned Israel on almost every issue, in almost every vote at the United Nations. Israel's ambassador to Ukraine, Michael Brodsky, expressed his disappointment with Zelensky's government in the form of a tweet. So Brodsky tweets the following and responded to Ukrainian decision to vote in favor of seeking an International Court of Justice opinion on Israel's activity in the Palestinian Authority's territories in the West Bank. Ambassador Brodsky tweeted, quote, Ukraine's support of the United Nations resolution, Israel's practices, denying Jewish ties to Temple Mount, and calling the ICJ advisory opinion is extremely disappointing. Supporting anti-Israeli initiatives in the United Nations doesn't help to build trust between Israel and Ukraine. Itamar Ben-Gvir, newly elected to serve in the Israeli government, will demand legislation to allow the death penalty for terrorists. Ben-Gvir will incorporate this demand in his negotiations to join Benjamin Netanyahu's emerging coalition. Although previously supported by several members of Netanyahu's Likud party, and while similar laws have been discussed in previous administrations, these laws have been consistently ruled out by previous coalition members. It's gotten nowhere. But this is a major question for Ben-Gvir. But now, it's not so clear that it'll be rejected. With a secure right wing and religious government set to be formed, the law demanding that the death penalty for terrorists be instituted is likely to win a majority support. Ben-Gvir made putting terrorists to death a part of his campaign promises and a platform. He hopes to include the legislation in his coalition agreement, along with other moves he describes as bolstering sovereignty and the rule of law. The proposal brought forth by Itamar Ben-Gvir reads, in recent years, we are witnessing a growth of expansion of murderous terrorism directed at Jews just because they are Jews, and in an effort to harm Israel and the revival of the Jewish people in their homeland. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, tell me what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. I'm disappointed that there's been a collapse of the left in Israel. I believe in discussions and disputes. It's a Jewish value, not simply to be contrary or difficult, but rather it is through thoughtful argument and debate that better situations and solutions arise. Echo chambers are never effective ways of coming up with solutions to issues, big issues and small issues, but certainly in terms of government. The Talmud and Mishnah and later rabbinic discussions are filled with disputes. They're all about disputes. Minority opinions are given great respect, and we quote and learn from these minority opinions, as well as from majority opinions. Just like a dissenting opinion in the US Supreme Court. Our society is stronger when there are different groups with strong representations on different sides of the aisle. Differences help us refine our argument. Differences, when they are treated with courtesy and respect, makes us stronger. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.